There is a form of fear that goes beyond ordinary weakness. Common cowardice can at least be understood. A person stands before something horrifying and chooses to flee. Most human beings, when confronted with real terror, cannot honestly claim they would act differently. But another type exists entirely, a darker kind. It is the kind shown by a man who spends years committing atrocities without hesitation, without doubt, and often with pride. Then, the instant circumstances shift against him, he abandons every ally, every supporter, and every subordinate to save himself. He trades their lives for his own survival. That is not panic. That is revelation. It exposes what he truly was beneath the titles, the authority, and the ideology he once served. Erich von Bach belonged to that category. His story remains among the most disturbing to emerge from the Second World War. He was born Erich von Bach-Zelewski in 1919 in Lauenburg in Pomerania, a region that today belongs to Poland. His family carried a long military background. Though wealth was absent from their lives, the von attached to his surname suggested aristocratic roots, yet his upbringing looked nothing like nobility. At the age of 15 at the opening of the First World War, he entered the German army. That decision reflected either fierce patriotism or a desperate desire to escape an unhappy home life. He fought on the Western Front during some of the conflict's most brutal battles and survived the war. When he returned home, Germany no longer resembled the nation he believed he had fought for. Like countless veterans of that era, he came back to a country that seemed shattered beneath him. In 1930, he joined the Nazi Party. Soon afterward, he entered the SS. He quickly proved himself to be exactly the sort of figure the organization wanted. His ambition followed the specific culture of the SS. It was not ordinary ambition for comfort, wealth, or status alone. His drive operated without moral restraint. He recognized something important very early. Inside the SS system, advancement came fastest to men willing to carry out actions others would hesitate to perform. Again and again through the 1930s, he showed that willingness eagerly. By the beginning of the war, he had risen to become a senior SS and police leader in the East. That role placed him in one of the most influential and horrifying positions within the Nazi structure. When Germany launched its invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, Erich von Bach received authority over so-called anti-partisan operations in occupied Eastern territories. The phrase sounds bureaucratic, almost harmless, but the reality behind it was catastrophic. In 1941 and 1942, anti-partisan warfare in the occupied East meant the organized slaughter of vast civilian populations. SS and police formations entered villages and executed entire communities. The justification was brutally simple. Any settlement located near partisan activity was automatically treated as an enemy supporter. The campaign also involved the destruction of Jewish populations throughout Belarus, Ukraine, and the Baltic states as part of the wider Holocaust unfolding alongside the war itself. Even the lowest historical estimates conclude that the units operating under Bach-Zelewski's authority were responsible for the deaths of somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 people during the conflict. Other historians argue the number was far greater. Bach-Zelewski did not remain far from the violence behind an office desk approving documents. He appeared at the scenes himself. He observed the killings. At times, he personally took part. There is recorded testimony connected to Heinrich Himmler's visit to Minsk in 1941. During that visit, Himmler witnessed Jewish prisoners being executed by men under Bach-Zelewski's command. The sight reportedly affected him so severely that he nearly collapsed. It remains one of the strangest details associated with the Third Reich, considering Himmler himself had authorized those same executions from the beginning. Bach-Zelewski reacted very differently. He showed no visible discomfort, no hesitation. He appeared entirely comfortable with the actions of his forces because those actions came directly from his own orders, and he either believed or behaved as if he believed that everything being done was justified. In 1942, however, he suffered a psychological collapse. He was admitted to a hospital with an official diagnosis, describing severe mental disturbances connected to his responsibilities in the East. The wording itself was unusually direct, considering the Nazi leadership generally insisted the extermination campaign produced no emotional consequences for the men involved. Eventually, he recovered. He returned. Then he resumed his duties. In 1943, he received another assignment that would become one of the defining chapters of his career: the suppression of the Warsaw Uprising. During August 1944, the Polish Home Army launched an uprising against German control in Warsaw. It became one of the war's most remarkable resistance movements. Civilians and lightly equipped fighters confronted the full military machinery of German occupation inside the streets of a major European capital. The uprising continued for 63 days. It was ultimately crushed, but the effort required enormous German resources and demonstrated that organized resistance was still possible even during the fifth year of the war. Responsibility for destroying the uprising was handed to Erich von dem. The methods he used became infamous internationally, even by the already brutal standards of the Eastern Front. Forces under his command, including some of the harshest auxiliary formations serving Germany, killed between 15,000 and 2,000 Polish civilians during the uprising. Many of those killings were deliberate massacres unrelated to military necessity. Among the worst atrocities was the Wola massacre during the uprising's opening days. Between 4,000 and 6,000 people died inside a single district over only a few days. Women, children, patients lying in hospitals, priests, anyone unfortunate enough to be present when Baczelski's units swept through the area. Then Germany lost the war. And at that moment, Erich von Bach's story changed direction in a way unlike almost any other figure from that era. Once the conflict ended and the Allied powers began identifying responsibility for what had taken place, Bach-Zelewski reached a decision. It was cold, precise, entirely without sentiment. He examined the reality facing him and reached a conclusion. Denial would not save him. Hiding would not save him. Escaping to Argentina, as several former colleagues managed to do, was not the path he chose. Instead, he decided survival depended on becoming valuable to the prosecutors. He transformed himself into a witness. At the Nuremberg trials, he took the stand. He gave testimony against Hermann Göring and other leading figures of the Nazi regime. He described in detail how the SS functioned, who issued particular commands, and which officials carried responsibility for specific crimes. He delivered extensive testimony concerning the organization of the Holocaust and the anti-partisan operations carried out in the East. For the Allied prosecution, his statements carried enormous value because they came from someone directly involved at the highest levels of the system. He knew what had happened. He knew who ordered it. The men who had once served beside him immediately understood what he was doing. He was sacrificing them, every officer who had trusted him, every subordinate who had fought alongside him, every individual who had viewed him as a loyal comrade within the machinery they operated together. He handed all of them over in exchange for preserving himself. And the strategy worked almost entirely. In 1951, a West German court placed him on trial for involvement in the Night of the Long Knives murders of 1934. Compared to the full scale of his crimes, the accusation was relatively minor. He received a sentence of 10 years. He served part of that punishment. Then, in 1961, he faced trial again. This time, the charges involved ordering the deaths of 6 German communists before the war. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment. At first glance, it appeared justice had finally reached him, but the meaning of life imprisonment inside the West German legal system during the 1960s was different from what many imagined. He died behind bars in 1972. That meant he lived until the age of 72 and spent approximately the final decade of his life incarcerated for the murder of 6 individuals, while even the lowest estimate connected to the forces under his authority reached several 100,000 deaths. The numbers are difficult to comprehend. At minimum, 300,000 dead. Testimony exchanged for survival. A prison cell in West Germany at the end of it all. During the war, Erich von Bach turned himself into one of the most efficient killers produced by human conflict. Then, once the war collapsed around him, he dismantled his own network with the same calculated precision. He betrayed everyone near him and eventually died in prison at 72. He was not the single worst figure created by the Third Reich. The number of contenders for that distinction is overwhelming, but he may have been among the most completely dishonest. He adapted himself to whatever circumstance demanded, without any visible foundation of loyalty, conviction, or principle beneath the surface. To him, the SS uniform represented advancement. Ideology served only as justification, and the men around him mattered only while they remained useful. The instant they became dangerous to his survival, they were abandoned. History creates many different kinds of monsters. Erich von Bach was the kind that could stare directly at you while everything happened. If you want more stories about military history, political power, and the darkest moments of modern society, stay with us for the next chapter. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.